Let's begin first up with the latest on the G7 summit. Leaders of the G7 countries have gathered at the French luxury resort town of Evian-Les-Bains for the high-stakes 52nd G7 summit. This year's summit kicks off just hours after a historic preliminary deal between the US and Iran. President Donald Trump arrived at the summit venue where he met French President Emmanuel Macron, and it was while speaking with reporters that Trump said the deal with Iran is all signed and that the Strait of Hormuz is already partially opened. Trump added that the Strait of Hormuz will be opened completely once the deal is formally signed on Friday in Geneva.
I'm very happy to say it's signed, the deal's all signed, and the strait is already partially opened. As you know, they're doing a little hunting for a couple of mines that they've already found, but it's essentially ships are starting to go out now. On Friday, it'll be completely opened.
Later, Trump was seen alongside the other G7 leaders holding discussions and posing for photographs.
Thank you.
Earlier, Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer arrived at Evian-Les-Bains for high-stakes summit. Brazilian President Lula da Silva and Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi also arrived at the summit. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is also scheduled to reach Evian-Les-Bains today. And besides attending a working session with French President Emmanuel Macron, Prime Minister Modi is also expected to meet President Donald Trump, which would mark the first in-person meet between Trump and Prime Minister Modi in over a year. Modi is also slated to hold bilaterals with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and UAE President Al Nahyan. In fact, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has arrived in Geneva before heading to the G7 summit. Zelensky is expected to meet President Donald Trump and discuss bringing the Ukraine war to an end. In a light-hearted moment in Geneva, Zelensky even said that he was planning to travel from Geneva to the G7 summit by car. As he said, President Donald Trump took all the helicopters.
After No, I think that we will do by car. So can you stay? President Trump, I think, took all the helicopters.
Earlier this week, Zelensky had urged a decisive and substantive response from the G7 leaders after the latest wave of Russian strikes that killed at least 11 people. He revealed he had proposed a meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin at the G7, but that Moscow was not ready for it. Well, joining us live from France is WION's Assistant Editor for Foreign Affairs, Siddhant Sibal. He's joining us live from Evian-Les-Bains. Siddhant, of course, the theme this time around is working together to address major international challenges. First up, give us a broader understanding of this theme and the important decisions that are to take place in the G7 summit.
Well, yes, this year's G7 summit happening in the backdrop of the conflicts in West Asia and in Europe is surely going to be a very important summit. And the Ukrainian president, as you rightly pointed out, has just reached, and he will be meeting with the G7 leaders in perhaps few minutes. In fact, before I speak, I'll give you a view of the situation on ground. You can see the visuals, the first visuals of the leaders meeting, the Japanese Prime Minister at the summit venue, and also the world's media gathered here on the ground to cover and give a minute-to-minute development of the things, how they shape. It's just around 9 a.m. here. It's a long day here where we have three key sessions, one on Ukraine, one on West Asia, and one on international solidarity. One of these sessions will be attended by the Indian Prime Minister and invited countries like Kenya and Brazil and others. And we know that the Outreach Summit focuses on countries from the global south, and of course India is seen as the voice of the global south. In terms of the outcomes, well, essentially this is a coordination grouping, and it basically shapes the discussions around a particular subject. Now we know for G7 leaders, this is a group dominated by Western countries, focuses on Ukraine, but coming in the backdrop of the peace understanding between US and Iran. No doubt that will be the big focus. In fact, many West Asian leaders have been invited, like Qatar, UAE, and they will be having several bilateral meetings as well. The French side is focusing on an initiative on Hormuz post the ending of the conflict. And we know that in previous meetings jointly organized by the countries in Western Europe has seen invitation to India. So there will be packed sessions on various issues, discussions, conversations, and that, of course, essentially decides or gives direction to the future discourse. But for India, of course, as always, meeting with world leaders
Yes.
and, of course, talking about the issues on the ground. The Indian Prime Minister is expected to have as many as 5 bilateral meetings.
Yes. Siddhant, important that you mentioned about the bilateral that is expected between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump. Also, if you can take us through those important bilaterals that are to take place on the sidelines of the G7 summit.
Well, today the Indian Prime Minister is going to have 3 key bilaterals: Canada, UK and UAE. Now, all these 3 countries are seen as important partner countries of India. With Canada, we are seeing a reset. The Canadian Prime Minister was in India earlier this year, and the Indian Prime Minister was in Canada last year for the G7 summit. We know that both sides are focusing on security cooperation. India has its own major concerns regarding Khalistani extremists. With the UK, there's the Roadmap 2030. The British Foreign Secretary was in India, and we know that education is emerging as a key pillar of the relationship. UAE is seen as one of the key partners in West Asian region. The Indian Prime Minister meets the UAE President just weeks after he was in UAE, where focus was on defense, trade and other areas. But tomorrow it's expected to be German Chancellor. Germany is an important economy of the European Union, and India and EU are, of course, have been having conversations on the mother of all deal, that is the India-EU FTA. And of course, something that's going to hog the limelight is the meeting with the US President Donald Trump, coming at a time when the relationship hasn't been doing very well. There's anger, in fact, mounting anger in India over the killing of 3 Indian sailors. The trade deal, there is no major public information on where it stands, but the USTR is traveling to New Delhi next week.
All right, Siddhant, we leave it at that. We will, of course, keep coming back to you through the day for all the live updates from the venue itself of the G7 summit. For now, we shift focus to other stories we are tracking.